everyone, my name is Cindy and this is my cat Cicada, who I'm sure is going to make several appearances tonight. And today we are going to show you how to make mini Dutch apple pies from scratch. So I'm going to set him aside and wash my hands again, and then we can get started with the crust. Okay, so we're going to make our crust, or kind of more exactly, the dough for our crust first. I really like making pie crust. Even if I ever use pre-made pie filling, I prefer making the crust because I really do think that there is a big difference between the store-bought crust and the homemade crust, and that it is actually worth my time to do. But you know, if you don't have as much time or you just don't want to do it, you can always get the rollout kind of pie crust, and that'll work pretty well too. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to put our dry ingredients into a food processor. Technically this is a blender, but I use it as a food processor and it works really well. We need our 3.5 cups of flour. And this is a little half, so it's going to be quite a few. So that's half. One and a half, two, two and a half. Ooh, I might have enough in here. 3. And let's see. You know what? I'm going to say that's close enough to 3.5, so I don't have to open my new flour yet. Excellent. All right. I'm just going to throw that over there for this second. Give it a little shake. And then we can do our sugar up next. You don't need too terribly much sugar. Thank you, Sam. You just need a little bit to kind of make sure it tastes a little bit sweet because we are making a sweet pie. And you kind of want the flavors to be consistent throughout all of it. Just 2 tablespoons. Double check that. Yep. And then we're going to do our salt. 1.5 teaspoons. This is a 4th teaspoon, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. It's 1.5 teaspoons. All right, and then we will pulse this. Alright, so not too terribly much difference, because really when it's dry we're just trying to mix it all together. But now we got to start adding our butter. Sam, could you get me one of the sticks of butter from the freezer? With pie, you always want to make sure that things are as cold as possible. Thank you. That's also why you should probably try to use a food processor instead of just your hands or a bowl, because usually it makes the whole mixing process go by a little bit faster, and then you don't touch the materials as much with your hands warming them up. So you should try to put your butter in the freezer beforehand. I also put the apple cider vinegar in the freezer beforehand, so just kind of trying to make sure that it is very, very cold so that we can get nice like butter chunks, because having butter chunks is what gets you a nice flaky pie crust. If you have a really good food processor, you probably don't need to cut up your butter as small as I do, but I always make sure to kind of cut it into like a tablespoon and then make it into these little 1/2-inch chunks. right, when you've got it all in there, you are going to start pulsing it. You can pulse all your butter at once, but I really don't recommend it. I recommend doing it in batches like this. All right. So you can see that it's already starting to turn kind of shaggy, which is just like a weird term that sort of means it's not looking completely dry. It's looking like there's little kind of chunks in there, but they're not like uniform chunks. They're kind of like long, shaggy chunks. So there goes the kitten. Chunks go in. There are, if I remember correctly, 3 sticks of butter in this recipe, so it is going to be a very buttery pie. You can like substitute butter with margarine or like Crisco or something if you really want. That does change the flavor and the texture a little bit. So you just kind of have to be careful with that, but it is like fully possible. So if you can't consume a lot of butter or don't want a lot of butter, there are some non-butter options. Okay, so we're going to pulse it again. Thank you. See, if you had a really good processor, you wouldn't have to just like shake it that much, but I got a blender, so we're going to shake it. And then this is our third and final stick of butter. Sam, while I do this, could you prepare me a mug of ice water? You just need to get like a large mug, and then you put some ice in it and you put some water in it, because we're going to need about a half of a cup. So if there ends up being like about a cup of ice water in there, that's fine. Thank you, Sam. Okay. Thank you kindly. Anywhere's fine. Alright. I can already feel the butter sort of sweating in my hands, even though it was just in the freezer, so we're trying to move a little bit fast, because we definitely want there to be butter chunks, because that's going to make our crust so good and flaky. Alright, so this is going to be the most, I'm assuming, entertaining batch of pulsing, because I'm probably going to have to turn this whole thing upside down, and with any luck, it will not pop open on me, though that has happened before, so let's see. Okay, I turn it upside down because the butter packs to the bottom, and so I'm kind of trying to mix it up. There will be full butter chunks in here, and that's okay, but I kind of want it to look like this weird wet sand look where there's like kind of chunks in it. And so yeah, I think that actually turned out pretty well. So let's see. we're going to transfer it into a large bowl, which we have right here. Okay. And so there we go. See how it kind of looks like wet sand? Kind of cut it up with our knife because it sort of squishes together at the bottom. Alright, and then we're going to add our fully wet ingredients, and that's what's going to help us combine it. Okay, so we have our apple cider vinegar. There it is. Just 2 tablespoons. You want something vinegary because the acidity helps sort of balance all that butter and sugar. That's why I prefer to use Granny Smith apples, and we'll be using Granny Smith apples for this. And then the apple cider so that, you kind of keep that consistent apple-y flavor. And then we're going to add a 1/2 cup of our ice water. So just kind of, gonna add less than 1/2 cup now because I don't want it to get too wet. And you really just drizzle it over. So you can just use your hands, but actually I'm going to start out with a fork. Sam, could I get a fork, please? I was going to do it with my hands, but now I have a Band-Aid on my hand today, and I feel like I should just start with a fork at least. So that's what we're going to use to kind of mix it all together. And it's actually going to combine really fast. Thank you, thank you. If you're worried that it's not combining, that it is too dry, you can always add more ice water, but you want to start mixing it kind of as much as you can first before you add extra, because the kind of weird, kind of fun thing about baking is that you often feel like it's going to be too dry, but if you just wait a little bit longer and keep combining it, it's actually not too dry. But by then you've kind of made it too wet and it's a whole thing. But I think that, yeah, this can actually do with a bit more water. So I'm just going to try to put... typically you probably should be using just a tablespoon instead of eyeballing it. Because about a tablespoon at a time is a good amount of liquid, but I like to live dangerously. This is actually coming together really nice. It probably just looks like wet sand, but I can feel it like clumping against the fork. I'm going to do just a tiny bit more over here because it's a little wet over there. And use the fork again, and then we're going to use our hands to combine it. And that's why it's always important to wash your hands before baking, because you inevitably will just have to put your whole hands in something. But yeah, see how it's sort of pulling away from the sides, and we're not leaving such a mess against it. Yeah, that's really good. Let's see if I can... Yeah, so we already have chunks. And yeah, I can kind of just push this together. So let's move everything out of our way. I do have to actually open up that new flour because I need to flour the surface. Thank you, Sam. I'm just trying not to explode this in my own face, but I'm definitely going to. Okay, there we go. Put that over there. Spread this out. And then just kind of dump it onto your flat, floured surface. It already smells so good. Another reason why I like to hand make pie crust is that it just smells and tastes so good. And it's one of those doughs that you don't have to worry as much about the negative consequences of eating it, because there's no eggs in it. There's usually no egg, there's usually no milk. The butter, is already nicely processed. If your acidity, your vinegar is already processed. The water, as long as you're using it from a good drinking source, is all ready to go. Sometimes you have to be careful about flour, so do what's safe for you. But it is, a little bit easier on the human body to eat than like cookie dough, which does have eggs in it. Okay, I'm gonna get this all together. So there's fancy ways to try to do pie. You make it into different chunks and you layer it, and I just kind of do this sort of motion where I'm just lumping it together. But what you do want to do is you do actually want to split this in half. It just makes it a little bit easier to chill. And if you were gonna switch it up and do like a lattice on your pie instead of like a streusel topping, which is what we're gonna do, then you do want to like separate the two out. It just makes it easier. Okay, I'm gonna add a little bit more flour because I do feel like it's just a tiny bit wet. And you don't want it to feel wet. You want it to all adhere to itself. Not to you or anything else. You don't want it so dry that it's basically flaking and falling apart, but you don't really want to feel a lot of moisture up in here. And it's very easy to sort of manipulate right now. And I'm gonna pop it into like a little disc because we're gonna chill it, and it becomes easier to de-thaw when it's in like a semi-flat disc rather than a round ball, because otherwise it takes forever, and you kind of de-thaw the sides while keeping the interior just ice cold. So that one's done to the side, but we need to finish this one. Yeah. Here, I'll switch you, Sam. Thank you. This is going to make a lot of mini pies because this is essentially more than enough for one whole pie with a top and bottom. So this is probably going to make around like 15 to 20, depending on how big you want to make your mini pies. We're going to be putting them in muffin tins, so that's going to make like more than 12, probably something like 20. Get that all nice and good. It's all holding together. Put it into its little disky disc. Yes. Good for us. Good for us. Okay, and then we're just gonna wrap it up. I'm terrible at cling wrapping things, so I'm sure this is going to be a bit messy, but that's okay. This actually came apart a little bit nicer than mine often do. And then every time I always tuck it under, and then I kind of squish it out just a little bit more to get it the correct disc size. And there's one. Okay, tuck everything under. You don't want to expose any of this to the air because it will get oxidized and sort of crusty. And there are our 2 big old things of pie dough. So these we're going to put in the fridge for at least 2 hours. You can put it overnight, and I think that it will stay in the fridge pretty good for about a week. So if you kind of forget about it or don't want to go and do this, it'll be good. But we're going to put this into the fridge to get all nice and chilled, and then we're going to go move on to the filling. Okay, so now we're going to work on making the filling for our mini Dutch apple pies. You have the ingredient list and the directions and everything, so you can use those. But just as a reminder, we're going to be using some brown sugar, some granulated sugar, about 3 Granny Smith apples, and then we have vanilla extract, cardamom, pumpkin pie spice, and cinnamon and salt, as well as a little bit of lemon juice. So we're going to assemble it now, and you can feel free to follow along or speed forward or just put it in the background. So the first thing that we're going to do is we are going to peel our apples. You can technically keep the skin on. It's not going to hurt you or anything. Lots of good nutrients in apple skin, but I just prefer when I make apple pies to take the skin off, because sometimes it can get kind of leathery sort of when you bake it, so I always make sure to peel mine. Alright, after you've got your apple peeled, you're going to want to chop it into small pieces. Some people say that you should put it in slices, and you can, but I think for mini pies like these, you definitely want to make the pieces smaller so that you can put more filling into each of the pies, and so also that you can kind of pack in as much as possible. And so this is about the size that I make all of them. They're not always perfectly consistent, but that is okay. So that's my first apple, and so now through the magic of pausing, I am going to finish peeling and chopping these. You do the same, and feel free to pause the video if you want to make sure that we're doing all this together. Thanks. Okay, so we've got all of our apples chopped up nice and neat, and then we're just going to essentially flavor them so that, you have really good tasting apple pie instead of kind of a weird just apple thing. So I made sure to squeeze some lemons, and this was a tablespoon of lemon juice. You just drizzle the lemon juice on over, and it kind of doesn't matter how you add these filling ingredients. At this point, it's not very important. But I am going to put in 1/3 cup of packed dark brown sugar. That's packed. And then 1/4 cup of white sugar. This is half, so it's going to be half of this. Okay, so that's about a half. Pour it over. And then we're going to add our extra stuff. Some people say that you shouldn't put vanilla extract, but I like it. I think it blends in well. And we're only going to put in, let's see, it looks like a half of a teaspoon. Oh no! Alright, so this is a fourth, so we're going to do 2 of these. That's 1. And that's 2. And then, like, probably what I should have done is I should have put in my dry ingredients with my wet ingredients because I'm not using another form of measuring spoon. But we've already gone down this path, so here we go. But Sam, could I maybe have, like, something to wipe the spoon with? Alright. Apparently there is the cat behind me being cute. Yeah, there he is. His name is Cicada. Very cute. He's very interested and he's very cute. Alright, so we're going to put a little bit of cardamom. And that is just a fourth of a teaspoon. So 1 of these. And then I think it's a full teaspoon of cinnamon. Yep. So 4 of these. 1, 2, 3, 4. You can add a little bit less if you want, but I enjoy cinnamon. And then finally some pumpkin pie filling, just another fourth. I liked adding this in because I think it sort of gives you like a richer flavor instead of just being sort of plain cinnamon. That's also why I add the cardamom. And if you don't like as much cinnamon, but you do like sort of pumpkin pie flavors, you can sort of substitute the cinnamon and the pumpkin pie, switch them around. One important thing that I also forgot to grab is a mixing spoon. So Sam, if you could grab me a mixing spoon, I'd appreciate that. There we go. This will work. And then you just sort of mix it up together. So we're going to basically try to coat all of our apple slices, our apple chunks, to try to get them all kind of uniformly covered with the sugar and the spices. And this is the thing that essentially releases the water in your fruit. I think it's called mictating, if I remember correctly.
Maceration.
What?
Maceration?
Maceration?
Yeah.
Maceration?
Yeah.
All right, I got it wrong. It's maceration. So we've all learned something today.
Pretty sure.
Well, it's one of the two. We'll all look it up later, I'm sure. All right. Either way, we're basically trying to use the sugar on the outside to get out the water on the inside. And you can already kind of see that it's already sort of doing that. And we're going to leave this alone for at least an hour. You can do this for up to 3 hours if you want, but don't do it any longer than that. It just kind of helps combine the sugar and the spices and the apple and get out a little bit of that water and everything. And yeah, so this is just the thing that you can set aside and let it do its job, and then when it's all done, you can start using it. Alright, so the next thing we're going to do, which is sort of the last thing we have to make, is going to be the topping, our little streusel topping, and you definitely need it if you're going to make a Dutch apple pie, and it's kind of the reason why I love Dutch apple pies so much. It's very good. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is combine all of our wet ingredients, which means we need our 1 cup of flour, right, that is 1 cup. Then, did I say wet ingredients first? Because I meant to say dry ingredients, because that makes more sense. So if I said you should add your wet ingredients first, do what I do, and not what I say. Alright, so we've got our flour in, and now we're going to put in our light brown sugar, and you put in 2/3 of a cup. Might need to make this little hole a little bit bigger. There we go. As always with brown sugar, you're going to pack it in. That's 1/3. And that's 2/3. Alright. Optional, but I really like doing it, is adding in some walnuts. You'll need 1/3 of a cup, all chopped up nice here. But if you don't like walnuts, you can also substitute it with another nut. Or, if you have a nut allergy, you can simply do no nuts. It's not going to really destroy this. You can even add oats if you prefer to add oats because you want something with a bit of texture to it. Alright, and then we're going to put in 1/4 of a teaspoon of salt. And if you just watched our filling video, you may have noticed that I said you need salt, and then I did not put salt in the filling, and I went back between takes, and I put salt in, because salt is always important to have. And then we're just going to mix up our dry ingredients. Another optional thing that you can do if you want to make sure you get all the spices mixed in nice is to put a little bit of cinnamon or pumpkin spice mix into your topping. You can measure it if you want. I would say for measurements, about 1/2 teaspoon is good. I just like to shake a little in and then kind of see that it changes the color of the dry mixture, and then that's kind of good enough for me. Alright. And then so the last thing that we're going to do to make our topping is we're going to add in melted butter. Now I don't know about you, but I was always told that to get this good topping, you need to add chunks, like little pea-sized chunks, but that is a gosh darn lie. Because what you want to do is you want to add melted butter, and then you want to let it chill for 10 or 15 minutes, and then stir it up, and that's how you make the chunks. The butter chunks don't work. It means you have to add a lot of butter, and then you get a lot of loose topping. So the correct way, the best way, is the melted butter. And that was my 6 tablespoons of butter. I think I actually added 1 tablespoon extra, but we're making Dutch apple pie. We're not focusing on health right now. We're focusing on deliciousness. And so you can kind of see that it's making this sort of weird dough-like thing that kind of clumps up a little bit. And you just want to stir it until all I keep saying wet. You want to stir it until all the dry ingredients are mixed in and it no longer looks like you have a bowl of flour. And you can already tell that it's clumped up super nice. And you could, in theory, put this on your pie right now, but the reason I encourage you to chill it is because if you put chilled topping in the oven, it's not going to immediately melt and run all over the place. Whereas if you put unchilled topping in, it is likely to melt and run all over the place. So now that we've got this done, I'm going to pop it into the fridge for at least 15 minutes. It's okay if it's a little bit longer, but if you are going to put it in a little bit longer, make sure it's covered so you don't get fridge flavors on top of it. But we are just going to let this chill. Okay, so our dough has been chilling for a couple hours now, and I set it out about 15 or so minutes ago to give it a little bit of time to get to room temperature so that I'd actually be able to roll it out and manipulate it. And our filling has been sitting and losing liquid for at least an hour, so we're kind of ready to do assembling. Basically what we're going to do is you're going to roll out a chunk of your dough. At first it's going to be a little bit harder to use, because it has been in the fridge for a little bit and has gotten chilled and hard. So you're kind of going to have to just keep sort of trying. Make sure it's on a floured surface and that you flour your rolling pin too. If you don't have a rolling pin, I really encourage you to get one if you're working with pie crust, because you will definitely break something else. Like, I've rolled out dough with a glass before, and usually it works well, but you have to make sure that the dough is much more malleable than pie dough. Sorry I keep doing that, but that's probably going to happen several more times as I try to just get this to go thinner. Gonna go on the edges. Yes. Okay. Now we're getting somewhere. I've also already preheated my oven to 375, which is where you want it. So close. Ideally, I wouldn't do this, but it's taking too long, so let's make a smaller piece. I don't know if you'll be able to see, but there are some pretty good butter chunks in here, which is fine. That's going to make everything a little bit more buttery and more flaky. You want to try to get it out to at least like a fourth of an inch in thickness. If you can get it down to an eighth, that's better. But a fourth is okay too, especially because when you cut it out, I use a glass about this big because you need it to be about 3 to 4 inches in diameter. And what I do is I punch out a little circle like this. And this actually isn't big enough, and it's also a little too thick. So what I do is I punch out the circle, and then I roll it a little bit flatter and a little bit bigger, because I don't really have any circle that's going to be the correct size that I need. So kind of starting at the approximate size and then making it bigger is where I want to be. And once you've got a little circle, you just pop it into your muffin tin like this. And you're going to press it to the sides using your fingers. You want to make sure that it is flush against the bottom, flush against the edges. And just kind of like that. Now, if you want it to be prettier, take a knife or just use your fingers and kind of rip it a little bit closer to the edges like this. It's a big old chunk of butter. And then if you want to make it really tidy, just kind of tidy up the edges. And that's basically what we're going to do several times. So there's one. Two. 3. Gonna squish these scraps back together. Kind of like this. Get a nice little ball going. There's a butter chunk and I can really feel it melting in my hands. And then we're going to roll it out. There we go. This one's a little bit easier to roll out because we've already, gotten it to do what we wanted it to. punch out one of these. Let's see, not quite big enough. Let's make another little dough ball. Squish it all together. Get a good amount of that on. Okay, there we go. Actually, let's make this a little bit wider because I'm trying to get just two more. Just two more. So there we go. It's a bit better. That's one. And that's two. Because I'm only going to make 6 right now, but obviously there is plenty of dough left over, so you can make a whole heck of a lot more. We're going to repeat what we did earlier, rolling them out. And then they'll go into each of the parts, the cups, I guess, of the muffin tin. Actually going to get a little more flour because I think it's sticking just a bit. We don't want that. I'm also rolling it out because you don't want it too thick because then it's not going to cook the way you'd like. There we go. This one has a big old butter chunk in it. It will cook perfectly well, don't you worry. Okay, got that. And then our last one. All right, fantastic. Okay. So remember, we are just going to kind of press them into each of our little muffin tins. Try to keep it neat if you can, but I mean, I always think that deliciousness is better than aesthetics. So, this one, if you notice, kind of is a weird shape, but I think we have just enough dough in it to really get it to work the way we want. Make sure you don't tear it as you're putting it in the tin, because that, will affect the integrity of your little pies. All right. This one ended up a little too big. That's okay. We do want to rip out the excess because then it'll get, too doughy and kind of clumpy and it won't really cook correctly anyway. So yeah. Gotta make this one a little bit nicer because we have so much dough. There we go. After you've gotten all of them in, also as you can see, I like to leave space. You don't have to. I just think it's a little bit better in case it kind of bubbles up. And I'll So I'm going to take a fork and just stab the edges so that like they don't balloon up and can get the heat easily distributed throughout them. And then we're going to put our filling in. Thank you, Sam. Alright, so you see we've got our filling, lots of juice there. You can just kind of dump it all in, but I try not to just put a lot of juice in because then that gets watery and you might get, as Mary Berry says, a soggy bottom. And I put like, I think this is about 2 tablespoons of filling. You can overfill if you want, but you do want to leave room for the topping. So I try not to. I often do overfill though because, you know, I like to. Okay, so we've got all that. Let's kind of distribute that a little bit more because that one ended up a little bit full. That one's a little bit full. And actually, that one's a little bit empty, so gotta use our fingers. Just try to get everything sort of equal. The cats are going a little bit mad, but that's okay. It's their house. Alright, and ta-da. Okay. And now that you've got that all filled, we can add our topping. Thank you, Sam. So this has been chilling for at least 15 minutes. You can tell that it's gotten pretty dry. That's okay, that's kind of what we want. And you can just use your fork to get it going a little bit, basically unstick it from itself. But we're going to get some good, nice crumbles all up in here. And you're just going to, I mean, you can use a spoon, but my spoon got taken away, so. I'm actually going to crumble these up a little bit more because we have such a small pie that we have to have smaller pieces. And it's not too terribly hard to do. Actually, yes, Sam, if I could have the spoon, I would appreciate it. I think that will work a little bit better than just using my fingers. There we go. So put a little bit on. Attempt to, you know, keep it neat, but it's okay if it's not. Gonna get some good crumbles here. The sort of non-crumbly bits we'll also add here and there. Little base. Okay. Let's see. Add as much crumble as you want. I enjoy being generous with the crumble. Okay. That's a pretty good crumble all around. Alright. So what I always recommend you do is that you chill your pies for at least 10 minutes in the freezer before you cook it. So I'm going to let these chill in the freezer for 10 minutes and then I'm going to take them out and put them in the oven for about 20 to 22 minutes. It'll kind of depend on what your oven does. And then as soon as that's done, we can look at our finished pies. Alright, so we let everything chill in the freezer for about 10 minutes and then I popped it on in the oven for a good 20 minutes. And then I let this cool up here for about 10 to 15 minutes. And we have our super cute little hand pies all ready. You can see that they're a nice brown color, but not like burnt or anything like that. The bottom is actually a pretty good color too, if you can kind of just see it. And they're still warm, so this is the perfect time to eat them. I always like eating them with some cream or vanilla ice cream, but you can do whatever you like. So thanks for watching the video. I hope this was helpful and that you'll be able to make your own mini Dutch apple pie mini pies on your own. Bye!